We're talking about the preparation of documents, the New Jersey requirements and the federal requirements. So let's move on now. Using the contract forms, as I explained, we use several different types of contracts in the real estate industry. You have an employment agreement, an independent contractor agreement. That is a contract. You have listing agreements, contracts, agency agreements, contracts, leases, contracts. You have all kinds of contracts in the real estate industry. They all carry the same weight and obligation of a regular contract, and therefore you have to know how to use these contracts. So once again, this is the sales contract we use for the purpose of selling 1 to 4 family residential homes, single vacant lots, and individual condominium units. There's also, again, as I said, listing agreements, agency agreements, and all those other things. All right. Now, parts of a sales contract. Number one, we said contracts have to be in writing. Again, it could still be a valid contract if it was an oral agreement and there was clear and compelling evidence. But our licensing law, once again, demands that all contracts that realtors are involved in must be in writing. Must be competent parties. Must be an agreement to buy and sell, the offer and acceptance. An adequate description of the property has to be included. In this case, if you look on page 175 in your hard-covered 14th edition textbook, down on the bottom where it says, under article number 1, parties and property description, you have the names of the buyers, names of the sellers, and then down on line item 36, the property address. You must use the lot and block number as well as the street address along the town and county location as an adequate description for our contract purposes. Then the consideration must be spelled out, the price and terms of payment. Right under that, it says purchase price, and then you would fill in what the contract purchase is. And then underneath that, the financial disclosures. How much are they putting down? When are they putting down? How much is the mortgage, if any, is going to be required? Is there additional deposit monies brought to closing? Do me a favor, guys. When you're contracting with buyers and sellers and you're filling out these contracts, please check your math on your financials. Make sure they add up. I got to tell you, even experienced agents make stupid mistakes of not checking the math. And when the contract comes through, the numbers don't add up. And you're like, what are you presenting me? I can't have my seller sign this because the numbers aren't valid. They don't add up to the purchase price. How is that going to reflect on our ability to close the transaction? Oh, we can work that out. No, it's got to be worked out now. So we do have to make sure that our paperwork is accurate when we're filling it out. Then there must be a grantor's agreement to convey. If you look on page 176 in your book, it gives you the breakdown of the method of payments, including deposit monies, where they go into, what trust accounts it's in, is there a mortgage, how much, what kind, et cetera, et cetera. All that stuff has to be explained in the contract. Again, the seller must agree to sell. The grantor agrees to convey the property to the buyer. And a place and time of closing. Remember, I told you I always put in TBD and let the attorneys and title companies worry about the closing date. With also a little note, closing should occur within about approximately 90-day period of time. And then have your client's buyer and seller sign the contract at the end to make sure it's a true offer and acceptance. There are other non-essential elements in the contract that probably need to be there, but don't have to be. Number one, encumbrances of which the deed will be made subject. This isn't that important in the contract phase as much as it is in the discovery phase of the buyers looking up the terms and conditions of the current property owner's deed. That's where it would be spelled out. But if the seller does have a copy of their deed, that would be a really good thing to review with your attorneys to make sure that you understand the conditions under which you're buying the property. Now, earnest money deposits. It's been said that realtors often ask buyers to give them a good faith deposit money amount of about $1,000 to prove the seller that their offer is genuine. They got a pretty silly question to ask. If a buyer's buying an $800,000 house, is a $1,000 deposit going to hold that house for them? Of course not. It's not. In fact, in New Jersey, there's no legal requirement to have any earnest money deposits accompany a contract whatsoever. In fact, it's actually a waste of time to do it. What are you talking about? Today's practice is that we'll present the offer, and then if they agree to our offer, then we'll put up our deposit monies. That's the way it works today. Before it was, give me $1,000 with the contract and I'll present your contract. That way we can show the seller you have a real good vested interest in buying this property and I'll hold that property for you. No, it's not. That's just a bunch of malarkey that realtors made up to try to convince people to give them money. So to avoid all that rigmarole, and by the way, there's no requirement for earnest money whatsoever. To avoid all that, let's get the contract accepted. And in our disclosures, we'll say once the contract accepted, then we'll put down our 5%, $1,000, 10%, whatever it was. Now, mortgage financing the buyer plans to obtain and other contingencies we talked about. Excuse me. Sorry, long day. That's on that page, what was it, 176, where they're putting all the disclaimer of deposit monies, who it goes to, what trust accounts, how much, what's the mortgage, and that's all disclosed in the contract. Contract also conveys title to the buyer. The grantor grants, the buyer possesses at closing the property. Title evidence. The seller must prove that he is the grantor and has the right to convey title. The buyer will do title research to ensure that what they're buying is what they're getting and that the seller is the actual seller. Prorations and adjustments. That's like one of our last things we talk about on chapter 21 is what prorations and adjustments must take place at closing. Well, let's think about it, guys. Suppose I'm selling you an investment property, a three-family house, and we're closing on June 15th, and I collected $6,000 up front June 1st, payable to me, the landlord. So you're going to be buying on June 15th. Does there have to be an adjustment or proration of monies due you at closing? And the answer is yes. Because if you take possession of that property on June 15th, then you're entitled to half a month's income from the property. Therefore, there must be a proration or a debit from the seller of $3,000 and a credit to the buyer of $3,000 for half the month's rent, or an adjustment. Seller agrees to pay half month of the income collected for the month of June to the buyer at closing. Must be some sort of adjustment at closing for those offset costs. The seller is to keep the property in good condition and insured until closing. Because if there's something happens to that house between the point the buyer contracts on the time that he buys it, then the seller stands the risk of loss of any damages to the property, and this insurance company would cover that. The buyer, on the other hand, must ensure that there's an insurance policy on the house as of the day of closing, because after the moment they close on the property, the risk of loss belongs to the buyer. The seller must keep insurance on the property to closing. The buyer must have insurance on the property as of closing. Then there must be some talk about what would happen if the property somehow is destroyed. Well, in that case, as we said, a listing agreement would terminate, but with a sales contract. Well, I will tell you this, a change to the condition of the property has occurred since the original contract was signed, didn't it? Therefore, the contract will be voidable at the option of the purchaser unless the seller provides the check and approved plans to rebuild the property to the buyer, at which time they still might choose to go through with the process. Now, if either default, then we talked about what the penalties could be. rescission of contract, sue for compensatory or liquidation damages, or sue for specific performance. And every contract has contingencies or things that must be performed on. Now, one of a contingency could be deal must close before December 31st. That could be a contingency added to the contract by one of the parties. But let's say the other party says, well, no. I have tax concerns, so I want the closing to occur in January. Therefore, that contingency must be accepted or rejected by all parties before they can move on. Moving on. Other contingencies could be FHA and VA loans. Many sellers today say in the listing, no VA loans accepted on the purchase of the property. And the reason is the FHA has very strict inspection contingencies when they go to do a certificate of value estimate on the property's inspection. So to approve the loan for an FHA loan, the FHA says to the seller, we will grant ownership to a mortgage to the buyer if you do certain things to the property first. Many sellers don't want to be burdened with this crap. They just say, no, I'm selling the house as is. Let the buyer worry about that stuff. So no FHA or VA loans because they're going to require me to repair the property before they buy it. And I don't want to do that. That's the situation. Also, a contingency could be it's subject to an engineer's or inspection report. Many people hire inspectors to inspect property for conditions. They want to inspect the heating system, the air conditioning system, the roof, the siding, the doors, the physical structure of the property, all the operating facilities and systems in the property, its amenities, everything they're going to inspect. So they get a true nature understanding of what the property is offering when they buy it and what condition it's going to be in. A contingency could be an escape clause, like the mortgage contingency. Buyer has right to have 30 days in which they apply to mortgage. However, if he fails to get a mortgage in the 30 days, then that contingency could add that the seller then allows an additional 10 days for the mortgage to be to be approved. However, if buyer is still unable to get a mortgage, buyer has the right to cancel the contract and get his money back. That's an escape clause. And we talked about liquidated damages in the case where the buyer backs out of the deal. Also, conditional contract issues. Number one, all New Jersey sales contracts must have a plain language requirement. If you look at this contract, there's no, first party, the first part, and the second party, the second part, who to, wherefore, unto, whosoever, and all that crap. It's not in there. It simply reads, some municipalities may require a certificate of occupancy. In other words, very easy to understand plain English contract. But it must be in English. It must be in English. There's additional contract issues, rescission of contract. Does a party have the right to rescind a contract? I'll tell you right now, guys, maybe they do and maybe they don't. What do you mean maybe they do and maybe they don't? That's not very clear. Well, rescission of contract would probably say if a certain contingency has not been agreed to or a certain performance issue has not been performed on, then a party may have the right to rescind the contract and declare it null and void. And that could be because the buyer didn't get his mortgage, or he didn't perform his inspection contingency in time, or whatever. Some contracts add option agreements to them. An option agreement. Remember I told you about the sales manager, if you sell if you get 4 listings in a month, you get a $500 bonus. That would be a unilateral contract option offered to his employees. They can choose to perform on that or not. It's up to them. It's an option. Therefore, if you're going to include an option agreement in a contract, it's got to be in right above the signature lines. If you turn to page 186 in your hardcover 14th edition textbook, you'll see that it says additional contractual provisions. That's where you would put in any other agreements or contingencies in a contract. Well, what do you mean other contractual provisions? Well, things we talked about, but also things like the domino clause. I call it a domino clause. People call it sale upon sale clause, which means this. This is how it reads. Buyer agrees to buy when buyer sells his property. What does that mean? That means this contract is only enforceable when the buyer sells his house, then he's obligated to buy this house. But if he doesn't sell his house, then he's not obligated to buy this house. Well, wait a minute. We're here to sell the house, not to play games. So if you agree to a sale upon sale clause, that means if the buyer doesn't sell, then he can't buy. And if the buyer can't buy, then the seller can't sell. And if the seller can't sell, then the seller can't buy. See where I'm going with this? The domino effect. One affects the others. I would never allow my client to agree to a contingency clause for a sale upon sale. I would never. I don't think it's a very smart idea. But some people are desperate and will agree to anything. Also, if there's any what is called a land contract agreement, where the seller becomes the financer for the property buyer. A land contract is a special type of seller financing. We're going to actually talk about this more on Tuesday when we talk about mortgages. But a seller would do this, Mr. Buyer. What I'll do is, if you can't get a mortgage, I'll provide you with a line of installment payments that you must pay to me over time. We'll work out the monetary details and the interest rate, and then you have to give me a small down payment, and then meet your installment payments with me every so often. Now, if you're making those payments, you would be known as the equitable title holder, even though you're not getting the deed, because I'm going to keep the deed in the trust. Until you make that last installment payment to me, then I will release the deed from the trust and you become the owner of property. But if you miss your installment payment to me, then I have the right to foreclose and repossess my property from you and keep all the money you paid and not give you the deed. It's mine. This is a very unique style of financing that a seller could provide. And if so, I will caution you. Don't even think you can come up with the words to incorporate into the contract what the land contract facilitates. Have your attorney write out an addendum explaining everything about the seller financing arrangement and how it works. That way, as an addendum, it completes the contract. I'm done. We finished our contract presentation. What questions do you have? None? Can you please explain what grantor's agreement to convey means? The grantor agrees to convey title at closing, the deed, the title rights at closing to the buyer. And he must. By his contractual agreement, he must deliver equitable or the title, the deed, the title rights to the property at closing. A land contract sounds right to a lease to own, right? No, it's not a lease to own. That's another type of option agreement that could be incorporated in there, though. All right, no other questions? Let's move on to the review questions then. And yes, we're getting out a little early, if that's okay with you. But don't tell my boss. I'm my own boss. Who's kidding though? All right, chapter 11. Here we go. Question number 1. A legally enforceable agreement under which two parties agree to do something for each other is known as a excuse me. A legally enforceable agreement. under which two parties agree to do something for each other is known as a what we got? So from those who did respond, 89% of you are correct, answering C, a valid contract. Very good. Number two, a person drives into a filling station to top off her gas tank. She's obligated to pay for the fuel through what kind of contract? Okay, from those who did respond, 90% of you are correct, answering B for boy, implied contract. Very good. Number three, a contract is said to be bilateral if a contract is said to be bilateral if, and again, 89% of you are correct, answering D, all parties to the contract are bound to act. Very good. Excellent responses today, guys. Good job. A seller, number four, a seller gave an open listing to several brokers, specifically promising that if one of the brokers found a buyer for the seller's real estate, the seller then would be obligated to pay a commission to the broker. This offer by the seller is a or an and 67% of you are correct, answering D, a unilateral agreement. Only one broker has to perform to fulfill the obligation here. It was an offer. All right, number five. During the period of time after a real estate sales contract is signed, but before title actually passes, the status of the contract is and from responses, about 66% of you, two out of three, are correct, answering B, executory. That is correct. Number six, a 17-year-old New Jersey resident signs a contract to buy a home for himself and his wife. The contract is A 17-year-old New Jersey resident signs a contract to buy a home for himself and his wife. The contract is valid because he was emancipated by marriage. He is an adult. It is valid. And about 38% of you had that correct. Number 7. A broker has found a buyer for a man's home. The buyer has indicated in writing his willingness to buy the property for $1,000 less than the asking price and has deposited $5,000 earnest money with the broker. The buyer's out of town for the weekend and the broker has been unable to inform him of the signed document. At this point, the document is a or an At this point, the document is 54% of you are correct, answering B, an offer. Remember, it's not an acceptance until both parties are made aware of the offer and acceptance. Number 8, consideration given in exchange for a sales contract may take the form of and about 75% of you are correct, answering D, any of the above is acceptable, guys. And because they're all monetary equivalents. Number 9, a buyer makes a written offer to buy an apartment building for $900,000 with the closing to be on December 30th. The seller, who has income tax concerns, signs his consent to sell for that amount, agreeing to all the terms except that the sale cannot be closed until January. At this point, who's free to walk away and forget the whole thing? And from responses, about 55% of responses said D, that is correct. No, I'm sorry, it's not D. It's A. Either the buyer or seller can agree to walk away. Only 32% of you got A correct. Why is it A? Because the seller didn't accept the fact that it has to close at a certain period of time. Therefore, it's never been resolved. It's still an offer. It's never been resolved. So either party can still walk away. A is correct. Number 10, the seller told the buyer she'd leave the washing machine, but instead took it with her. The written contract made no mention of the washing machine. The buyer has no right to complain because of the rule of The buyer has no right to complain because of the rule of. And from responses received, about 47% of you, about 50% of you got it correct, and that's D for dog, parole evidence. The written contract supersedes any verbal agreements. Parole evidence rule. Number 11, New Jersey real estate brokers and their salespersons may fill in sales contract forms for and from respondents' answers, 63% of you are correct on A, 1 to 4 family properties. The others, letters of intent or attorney contracts. Number 12, a broker must deposit funds received as earnest money deposits in a special separate bank account within, we went over this on Monday. And from responses, 80% of you are correct answering B, 5 business days. That is correct, 5 business days. Number 13, buyers have a 7-day period in which they may cancel sales contracts on, I didn't go over it in this chapter, it's in there, but it's, excuse me. Buyers have a 7-day period in which they may cancel sales contracts on, and seeing that majority of people are not getting this, I'm going to say this. It is A, certain condominiums. Now, under the New Jersey Land Sales Full Disclosure Act, in certain condominium compounds where certain requirements are for FHA housing allowances or whatever, buyers usually have a period of 7 days in which to rescind a contract. So A is the correct answer, certain condominiums. Number 14. If a real estate sales contract does not state that the time is of the essence and the stipulated date of transfer comes and goes without a closing, the contract is then TBD. What is the contract? If a real estate sales contract does not state the time is of the essence and the stipulated date of transfer comes and goes without a closing, the contract is then 50% of you are correct answering C, still valid. Remember, it's up to the attorneys and the title companies to change the date at the last minute, and they do. That's the way it is. Number 15. A buyer has a contract to buy a commercial building, but would rather let his friend buy it instead. If the contract allows, the friend can take over the buyer's obligation by the process known as And responses indicate that 70% of you are correct, answering A, assignment. Yes, an assignment. Number 16, a suit for specific performance of a real estate contract asks for a suit for specific performance of a real estate contract asks for 51% of you are correct, answering D, a forced sale or purchase. Seller must sell, buyer must buy. Number 17, in filling out a sales contract, someone crossed out several words and inserted others. To eliminate future controversy as to whether the changes were made before or after the contract was signed, the usual procedure is to, I didn't go over it, it's in your text. If you read it, you know. And 83% of you are correct, answering D, have both parties initial or sign in the margin near each change. That would indicate that they accepted those changes before the contract was approved. Yes. Number 18, the buyer's offer in writing to purchase a house for $120,000, drapes included, with the offer to expire Saturday at noon. The seller's reply in writing on Thursday accepting $120,000, but excluding the drapes. On Friday, while the buyers are considering this counteroffer, the seller decides to accept original offer, drapes included, and state that in the writing. At this point, the buyers On Friday, while the buyers are considering this counteroffer, the seller decides to accept the original offer, drapes included, and state that in writing. At this point, the buyer and 60% of you are correct, answering B, are not bound to buy and can forget the whole thing. Why? They originally rejected the offer, counteroffered, then accepted the original offer, but never canceled the counteroffer. And you can't do that until you cancel the counteroffer. So he's not bound to buy. It's very confusing. Number 19, in New Jersey, a valid contract for the sale of real estate must include in New Jersey, a valid contract for the sale of real estate must include and about 45% of you are correct, answering B, an adequate description of the property. Remember, we said earnest money is not required. Signature of witnesses is optional, so B is the only one that makes sense. B for boy. And finally, last question, number 20. The sales contract says the buyer will purchase only if his wife flies up and approves the sale by the following Saturday. The approval by the buyer's wife is a and it is a contingency. 95% of you are correct on that one. Well done. So I put in the address for the homework tonight. Chapters 10 and 11 for Monday morning is the homework. For Monday, chapters 12 and 13 for discussion. I also gave you the recareercenter.com/review us. If you'd like, please give us a nice review on that site. It would help us a lot. And then I also included my email address if anybody has any questions. What were the answers to 3 and 18? 3 was D for dog, 18 was B for boy. And question 7, is it the seller who is out of town? Number 7. Okay, as in question says the buyer, which makes no sense. The buyer is out of town for the weekend and the broker has been able to form of the signed agreement. At this point, the document is an offer. That's all, it's just an offer. There's nothing else inferred by that question, it's just an offer. 19 is B, correct. Can you go over 18 again, please? States everything was put in writing, 18. Okay, yeah, it was, but they agreed to the original offer and then changed it with a counter offer. I'm sorry, they changed the offer to a counter offer, but then agreed to accept the original offer. They can't do that. They have to dismiss any counter offers before they accept an offer. So therefore, they're not bound by any contract. Book says 9 is D. 9 is A. D is wrong. Either party can walk away. The book is wrong. Which one has the homework? recareercenter.com/homework. Where it says homework, that's where its homework is. What is 19, A or B? 19 was A. What was the answer to number 16? 16 was D for dog. What web address for the review? Okay, I'll put it back in. Apparently this scrolls a little too fast for everybody. recareercenter.com/review us. Okay, I know it says that. Okay, I got 7. That's all right. Did I get a passing score? I don't know, Bruce. I don't know what you asked. I know what you answered. Sorry. All right, anybody else with a question before we call it a day? If not, you guys are free to go. Congratulations, you completed the first week. Some of you, maybe your second week, I don't know. But good luck to you. If you're back Monday, we'll see you back here Monday at 9 a.m. sharp. If anybody has any other basic questions to talk about, now's the time to ask. You're welcome, David. You're welcome, Stephanie, and everybody else. Thank you. Have a great evening, guys. Where can I find all these questions? They're in the ones we've been talking about, the poll questions. They're the review questions at the end of every chapter in your book. They're right in your book. Okay, guys, have a great night. Thank you. What does the office close?